Welcome to Rajya Sabha TV. I'm Amritanshu Rai and you're watching The Big Picture. Today we will take up the spy poisoning row leading to diplomatic action by the US and its allies. 18 countries, NATO members and European Union members are expelling as many as 100 Russian diplomats. Their action is in response to the incident of military-grade nerve agent poisoning of a former Russian spy, Sergei Skripal, in the United Kingdom. The European Union has called the attack a reckless attempt to murder a British citizen on British soil. Britain calls it a violation of the Chemical Weapons Convention and breach of international law. On Monday, US President Donald Trump ordered 60 Russian diplomats to leave the country and closed Russia's consulate in Seattle. US action is the most aggressive US move against Russia under Trump. White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders said in the statement that the action makes United States of America safer by reducing Russia's ability to spy on Americans and to conduct covert operations and threaten America's national security. Joining me on this discussion are Mr. Rana Banerjee, former Special Secretary, Cabinet Secretariat, Mrs. Meera Shankar, former Ambassador to the US, and Mr. Sibal, former Foreign Secretary, Government of India. So straight away, what does the diplomatic offensive by the US and the European Union mean for Russia? The measure of it, is it proportionate, disproportionate to the allegations?
Well, as you rightly said, these are allegations. Even Theresa May has said that it is highly likely that Russia is behind it, though her over-talkative foreign minister has said that Putin himself has ordered this. I think the Russian position is very sound and sober, that if this has happened and suspicion is Russia is involved, then there is certain process through the OPCW which Britain should follow. Inform the OPCW, send them samples so that Russia itself could investigate and then come to some conclusion. But instead of that, immediately they started accusing Russia. Putin, I think, said very sensibly that just before the presidential election and a few months before the World Cup, and he has the Sochi Winter Games in mind, why would anybody in Russia want to do this? So the whole thing is extremely suspicious. Nothing can be ruled out. There are deep states operating everywhere, and God knows who has done what and with what means. That's one. The other is that it's quite clear that the reaction of the United States and NATO and EU countries has very little to do with the actual incident on the ground. To that extent, it is utterly disproportionate, expelling so many spies, and Russia will retaliate. So what does the West want? Break down all communication with Russia, demonize Russia, and treat Russia as a third-rate, insignificant power with which they don't have to deal. They are creating unnecessarily tensions globally, which is going to affect the rest of the world. And they're entering into more and more into a Cold War atmosphere. And you cannot rule out any untoward incident here or there. They may not be able to control the situation. United States said that it is Russia's reckless action. I would say that the US and the European Unions and NATO's are recklessly acting against Russia.
Ma'am, what are the domestic compulsions that you think Britain, US and the European Union wants to address through this? So what are the other compulsions that they will really be addressing?
Well, I think, you know, when President Trump was campaigning and he got elected, he made, an issue of actually improving relations with Russia. And that, I think, has set off alarm bells within traditional sections of the US security establishment and also the European security establishment. So, in a sense, racketing up tensions with Russia create tripwires which hedge the president in and prevent him from acting on his impulses. So you're getting these mixed signals on Russia. For instance, recently after the presidential election in Russia, President Trump spoke on the phone to President Putin and congratulated him. Now that was leaked And it was also leaked that the advice to him had been not to ring up Putin, and that there was also consternation that he did not criticize Putin for the Skripal poisoning. So you can see that there is a traditional policy and a mindset which has been followed vis-a-vis Russia, and that it is going to be extremely difficult for anybody in the current atmosphere to think of, reducing tensions with Russia. But this is something which you can see from 2014, after Ukraine, that tensions with Russia have progressively gotten worse. So it was Ukraine, then it was Iran, Syria, then, it has been this poisoning, sanctions are still in place over the Ukraine issue vis-a-vis Russia. There were sanctions over Russian meddling in the US elections. 34 diplomats were expelled by President Obama when the US agencies said that there was evidence of Russian interference. And now another 60 have been expelled from the US, and the consulate in Seattle is going to be closed. All told, more than 100 diplomats are being expelled from the US and the EU. Now, you take a country like Austria, which says it's neutral. They have said that they stand by the decision to recall the EU ambassador to Russia, but that they will not expel Russian diplomats because they would like to act as a bridge with Russia and keep channels of communication open. I think that would be very important in this kind of situation.
I'll get Mr. Banerjee. Mr. Banerjee, on the espionage part, on the spying part. So these were military-grade nerve chemicals used to kill the former Russian spy who was a British national on British soil. So how does this really work, sir? I mean, and this is a normal routine in the espionage world. There are many people who get neutralized due to, but most of the time such a big uproar is not, or a reaction is not really seen. So what do you see in this?
Well, the neutralizing of people is not normal under any circumstances. This is the second time such an incident has happened in England. The first being the killing of Litvinenko, which happened in 2010. Sibal was, jailed in Russia in 2006. Then there was an exchange or a spy swap, as they call it, in 2010, and then he came over. Recently, there were reports that he had been feeling dissatisfied about the way that the Brits were treating him, and had initiated feelers possibly for a return to the Soviet Union, in fact, to Russia. In fact, his daughter, Yulia, had only returned from Moscow a day before the incident happened in Salisbury. So there were these rumors, and as Mr. Sibal said, there can be rogue elements in all services, the SVR or the FSB, which may or may not have had the official sanction. They might have still acted. There are also the Russian mafia, which are engaged in a lot of this type of activities in Europe particularly. So possibility of it has all the hallmarks of a special operation in which the some agencies do specialize in, but it's not normal.
So the kind of reaction to it and the attempt to take it to a new level of messaging, what do you see in that for the entire international scenario?
Well, firstly, let me correct you. He is the Russian national, not a British national.
Okay.
That is one. That is why, in fact, Russia asked for consular access, because, and they say that, look, since he's a Russian national and he's supposed to have suffered this chemical weapon attack or whatever it is, we don't know what actually his state of health is, where he is, whether he's progressing this and that, and they demanded consular access. Of course, they're not going to get it. What I mean is that the Russians are trying to expose all the weaknesses in Theresa May's case. Now, the thing is that Britain has made this charge. They went overboard. They simply went overboard. Russia and Britain is a very, very important member of the Western Alliance. And there is the NATO alliance, there is all the security commitments that they have vis-a-vis each other. The use of any form of nerve agents or chemical weapons is extremely sensitive issue and happening on European soil. It makes it even more delicate politically, etc., etc. And therefore, other countries are showing solidarity with Britain. Whether that kind of solidarity is justified or not justified, that's a different question. Second, of course, is that Putin has just won the election. A few days ago, he announced that Russia had developed a huge panoply of extremely potent weapons, which would make any anti-ballistic missile system or any defensive system of the United States worthless. And if what he said is true, that might actually be the case. And now he's going to rule for 6 years a strong man who has certain views and who is not afraid of the West, unlike the Chinese, who are much more careful in dealing with the West. And this is the way they think they can counter Putin, what they think are Putin's ambitions to recreate some kind of a former, not the Soviet Union, but exert dominance in their periphery. They accuse them of putting pressure on the Baltic states, etc., etc. And then, of course, finally, it is an internal matter in the United States, and US, because of internal politics and Trump's position, is actually being pushed by domestic politics to take actions which are simply not warranted. Where is the reason for Britain to expel 4 diplomats and for United States to expel 60? And also expel UN members of the Russian UN delegation, which actually violates the agreement between the United States and United Nations. So I would say that this is part of the whole politics of managing Russia, managing what they think is Russia's challenge. And the appointment of John Bolton as the National Security Advisor may also be a reason why this has happened.
Ma'am, how active is Russia post re-election of Putin as president of Russia as far as the espionage activity is concerned? So is that what is really affecting the European Union and the West, the aggression in the spying circuits?
I think this is something which is mutual. I wouldn't put it as something which is unique to Russia. And the fact is that since relations have become more tense in the wake of Ukraine, Syria, Iran, other differences, that obviously this kind of activity tends to increase from both sides. The Russians in turn have accused the US of funding different NGOs and political activities within the US, within Russia, not only this time but in the last presidential election. So, this is something where both sides play the game, and there have been certain kind of restraints which both sides have also exercised. So, the issue is the use of a military grade nerve agent, chemical agent, because this would be the first time since the Second World War that a chemical agent has been used. And in terms of the Chemical Weapons Convention, the use of any such weapon is prohibited. So one thing which should really be done is, you see, I don't know if both Russia and the US have actually eliminated all their stockpiles, because there was a certain period within which everyone was supposed to eliminate stockpiles. And people like in countries like India and others had done so. But both Russia and the US had sought extended periods, saying that it was not technically feasible to destroy all these. Now, I'm not sure if the destruction has been completed. If not, then I think it's important that the Organization for Prohibition of Chemical Weapons actually gets the 2 main chemical weapon stockpile holders to actually destroy their stockpiles on an accelerated basis.
On a prescribed timeline. Mr. Banerjee, on the aggressive aspect of Russian espionage and spying, what is it that you would like to add? Because just a while we were talking, you mentioned that yes, on that front, the Russians are much more aggressive than what they used to be.
No, it's a question of perceptions and capacities. The capacities certainly are there, but compared to, say, the Israelis, the Russians would be perhaps not as aggressive. They could be at par as regards, elimination operations are concerned. At one stage, even the CIA was having this capability. If you have seen the disclosures made by Mark Mazzetti in the, the change in the nature of the CIA's operations, both in Iraq and Afghanistan, have been brought on by conditions. So, from time to time, the Russians have had certain capacities, and whether they have used them in this instance or not, adequate proof has to be there before you can pin it down on the Russians.
And on the domestic consideration, you had some points to make.
Well, you see, all these countries, in the actions that they have taken, have certain domestic agendas. Theresa May herself is under some pressure due to Brexit. There are a lot of leaders gnawing away at her own ambitions of leadership. So this particular act of solidarity of the allies, Western allies, extends, support to the British, concept of having global, governance, global leadership, and to that extent, it perhaps helps Theresa May. Similarly, in the case of Mr. Donald Trump, I mean, it helps him to distance himself from the allegation that he was too cozy with the Russians. So even if there is a hard line which is being undertaken by the security establishment which is hostile to him, even then it helps his agenda of, trying to show that he is not over pally with the Russians. So these type of agendas are there.
And ma'am, there was some, the point that you're making, that there was some involvement of the American agencies and the Western countries' agencies when Putin was contesting elections. So it had come out in the open, and it was like really an event there. So what was the point you were making about that?
No, I think the Russians alleged that there was Western interference in their elections, or an effort to try to change the results of the election. So here you have, allegations of Russian tampering in the US elections. And
so the same kind of
from
thing.
the Russian side, there had been allegations that the US was putting up NGOs and political leaders in opposition, and, to actually contest Putin, or to, make it more difficult for him in the election. So these are allegations which the Russians had leveled, particularly during the last presidential election. I think that there is, a domestic benefit, as Rana said. Clearly, within the US, it is hedging President Trump in, and also enabling him to distance himself. In the UK, the Labour Party is now, for the first time, despite concerns about, or at least some concerns being expressed about Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, has now been shown to be ahead in the public opinion polls. Any tension with Russia plays to the advantage of the Conservatives and puts Labour on the back foot. So, and it also shores up Theresa May's leadership. Then, there has been this wedge between NATO, the EU, and the US because of President Trump's economic policies, and sometimes his very harsh rhetoric against the allies. Now, something like this helps to bring the allies together, and
band them together.
Bring them together, including countries like Italy, which were believed to be soft on Russia. They have also expelled, diplomats, including countries like France, which, have had more extensive dealings with Russia in many spheres. So it consolidates European opinion against Russia.
How does this manage to really, the attempt is to basically bring down pressure, corner President Putin. So does this help? Even the small countries like Lithuania, Latvia, Croatia, Czech Republic, so all of them have taken this opportunity and have acted somewhere or the other.
No, I won't say they have taken the opportunity. They have been pressured, and they can't stand out, because if they stood out, they would have very great difficulty, political difficulty within the European Union. And since they are supposed to have a common foreign and security policy, so any breakaway from that would actually make the position of these countries very difficult within the EU. And insofar as the Baltic states are concerned, they are leaders of the pack. They have actually been the most vocal and the most vociferous about countering Russia. But on this issue of spying and this and that, let's look at things, more objectively. The CIA is a huge, huge establishment. And there is the National Security Agency. What are they doing? They are not spying. Their purpose is spying. And I don't think Russia's spying agencies are anyway a match in terms of size and reach and electronic surveillance of the kind the NSA has. So let's not try and give the impression as if Russia is the most, how should I say, pervasive country in terms of global spying. Actually, it's the other way around. It's the other way around. And the British pride themselves on their MI6 or whatever it is, their external agency. So we should look at things much more objectively that we are looking at, and we should not buy the Western narrative so easily sitting here, especially in India. And so far as Putin is concerned, in 2012 during this election, and former Secretary of State recognizes this, that Clinton, that Putin dislikes her intensely because she was questioning the elections, and Putin believed that she was interfering in the elections. And even now, they are questioning the popularity of Putin and the fairness and everything of elections because Navalny, who has been now projected as the main opponent of Putin, as if since he was excluded, Putin's election is not legitimate. This is their way of trying to undermine the legitimacy of the election and prop up somebody within the system who is an opponent of the regime. This is also interference. What else is it? I mean, if tomorrow we had an election in India and the Congress got defeated and other countries said this election is not fair because, because Rahul Gandhi or somebody else should have won and he's the most popular person, how can others judge this?
Right.
So we should be careful in how we look at this situation.
So, ma'am, moving on, what is the measure or what is the expectation of the retaliation from Russia? So now, all the US and the Western European Union and the Western, Canada, Australia, Britain, all of them have done their bit. They've thrown in the cart.
Russia will take reciprocal measures. They have said that they will expel diplomats from all the countries who have expelled Russian diplomats.
In equal measure? In
equal measure. That is expected. Whether it will be equal or more or less, we have to see. But they will take action against all the countries who have expelled diplomats, Russian diplomats from their territory. Secondly, the larger impact. I mean, this is the tit for tat in terms of this impact, of this incident. But the larger impact that it has had is to push Russia much more towards China. And you can see that strategically for the West, I mean, this might be tactically something they benefit from, but strategically in the long run, it's something which is not, very wise, because it pushes Russia towards China. You've seen, now they have, arrangements for supply of gas pipelines, oil. There's far more coordination on international issues. And whereas actually economically there's little threat to the US from Russia, what it does is that it, in a sense, benefits China because they can sit back and watch US-Russia tensions escalate. So it actually accelerates the rise of China as a global power.
By default.
By default. Yeah. So if you look at it strategically, it's not a very wise positioning of the West to push Russia so firmly into China's
Would you like to add to that, sir?
I've been saying this for a long time. And from our perspective, this is a very unfortunate development, because the real threat to US power and Western hegemony is China. And China has unveiled this ambition so openly that by 2035 they'll have military machine that can win wars, and 2049 they'll be at the center stage of international relations, which actually means that they'll be equal to, or actually may surpass, the United States as the leading power in the world. 1.3 some billion people, the second largest economy in the world, shortly the largest economy, the largest exporting country in the world. Look at the resources that they command. Their Belt and Road Initiative, which is now penetrating Europe. So which country is the real long-term, or not even a long-term, medium-term strategic threat to United States and Europe and the transatlantic alliance? Is China, not a declining Russia. 145 million people, demographically, they can't even populate their country. Technologically, they have remained behind. Their industry needs modernization. The
economy is not doing too
their
well.
Manufacturing capacity has been lost. The economy has started picking up a little bit, but nevertheless, there are structural deficiencies in the economy which will prevent them from playing any large, ambitious global role. And they are not saying that they want to replace the West and etc., etc. Basically, Putin is saying, I'll defend myself. That if you attack me, I know how to defend myself, and I will defend myself. His posture is defensive, whereas the Chinese posture is not defensive. It is expansive.
Right.
But then the West has its compulsions or whatever they are, and they are, from our point of view, creating difficulties because Russia and China are coming closer together. China is a big problem for us, and Russia can no longer act as a buffer between India and China because their own relationship with China has become much closer. So the West, unfortunately, through its policies, is creating strategic problems for us, which were earlier not there to the extent that they are today.
Mr. Banerjee, would you like to add to that? Cornering of Putin, Russia getting closer to China, meaning in the spying world. How do you see it panning out?
Well, I have no major objections in principle to what has been said by both Ambassadors Sibal and Meera Shankar. In the context of espionage, I think the life of spies would go on. They will have to, particularly in hostile countries, get used to the idea of reciprocity and expulsions at moment's notice. So that is likely to continue. Apart from that, I don't see any heightening of tensions for India due to cozying up between Russian espionage and Chinese espionage. That's not likely to happen very easily.
So joining the dots, so the military grade nerve gas was the second time that you actually saw being used, and that is where it kicked off the entire uproar. Domestic compulsions kicked in, because of which the countries had to retaliate and move. Also, the attempt by default is benefit China, because Russia may end up getting pushed towards China. That's all we have time for in this big picture episode. We'll be back with a new show and a new episode. Keep watching Rajya Sabha TV.